The morning wind swept across the Wyoming plains, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of another lonely day. Mary Ellen Hartley stood at the window of her small wooden house, watching the sun paint the distant mountains in shades of copper and gold. 2 years had passed since Thomas died, crushed beneath the hooves of a spooked stallion. Yet the ache in her chest remained as raw as the day they lowered him into the ground. At 26, she was young to be a widow, young enough that the townspeople still whispered when she walked past. Some offered pity, their eyes soft with sympathy that felt more like judgment. Others were less kind, their gazes sharp with speculation about what a woman alone might do to survive. She'd learned to keep her chin high and her gaze steady, even when their words followed her home like shadows. The house sat at the edge of Willow Creek, a town that barely deserved the name. 24 buildings huddled together against the vastness of the prairie, as if seeking comfort in their closeness. Mary Ellen's home stood apart, a quarter-mile from the nearest neighbor, close enough to town for necessities, but far enough to avoid the worst of the gossip. She turned from the window and surveyed her domain. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and parlor all at once. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, cold now in the late summer heat. Thomas's rifle still hung above the mantel, cleaned and oiled, but never touched. The bedroom door stood ajar, revealing the quilt her mother had made for their wedding, its cheerful pattern a mockery of her current state. Outside, the small corral held 2 horses and a milk cow. The vegetable garden struggled against the dry soil, producing just enough to supplement what she could afford from the general store. It was a hard life, made harder by solitude, but it was hers. The sound of hooves on hard-packed earth drew her attention back to the window. A rider approached from the east, where the road led to the larger settlements. As he drew closer, Mary Ellen could make out details: a bay horse, well cared for despite the dust of travel, and a man who sat his saddle with the easy grace of someone born to it. He was tall, she could tell even from a distance, with broad shoulders beneath a worn leather vest. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, but she caught a glimpse of dark hair and sun-weathered skin. He rode past without stopping, heading toward town, but something in his bearing caught her attention. There was a tension in his shoulders, a watchfulness in the way he turned his head to scan the horizon. Mary Ellen found herself following his progress until he disappeared behind the false-fronted buildings of Main Street. She shook her head, annoyed at her own interest. Drifters came through Willow Creek regularly, men seeking work or running from something. They brought trouble more often than not, and she had troubles enough of her own. The morning chores beckoned. She fed the chickens, scattered corn with practiced motions while they pecked and squabbled around her feet. The cow needed milking, the horses needed water, and the fence along the north pasture had a broken rail that she'd been meaning to fix for weeks. By noon, sweat soaked through her dress despite the modest nature of her clothing. She'd long ago abandoned the restrictive corsets and layers that proper ladies wore. Out here, practicality trumped propriety, though the women in town still clucked their tongues at her shortened hems and rolled sleeves. She was repairing the fence, hammer in hand, when she heard horses approaching, her late husband's family again. She recognized the matched grays that pulled their fancy carriage, incongruous in this rough country. Margaret Hartley, Thomas's mother, sat rigid as always, her black morning dress absorbing the heat like a sponge. Beside her, Thomas's brother William handled the reins with the same casual competence he brought to everything. "Mary Ellen," Margaret called without dismounting. "We need to speak with you." Mary Ellen set down her hammer but didn't move closer. "Mrs. Hartley, William." "This foolishness has gone on long enough," Margaret said, her voice sharp as winter wind. "A woman alone, trying to run a ranch. It's unseemly. William has found a buyer for the property. A good price. Enough to see you comfortably back to Cincinnati. I'm not selling." Mary Ellen had repeated these words so many times they felt worn smooth in her mouth. William leaned forward, his expression attempting kindness. Be reasonable. Mary Ellen, you can't manage this place alone. The fences are falling down. The land's going to seed. Thomas wouldn't want this for you. Thomas is dead. The words came out harsher than she intended. What he would or wouldn't want stopped mattering the day that horse killed him. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. You always were too proud for your own good. Pride goeth before a fall. Girl, mark my words. They left in a cloud of dust and disapproval, the echo of their departure hanging in the air like a threat. Mary Ellen returned to her fence, driving nails with perhaps more force than necessary. Let them think her proud. Pride was better than surrender. The afternoon stretched long and hot. She worked until her hands blistered inside her gloves, until her back ached and her throat burned with thirst. Only when the sun began its descent toward the mountains did she allow herself to stop. The town beckoned. She needed supplies, flour, salt, perhaps some thread if she could afford it. More than that, she needed to remind herself that other people existed, that the world contained more than her own grief and stubbornness. Willow Creek came alive in the evening. Cowboys from the surrounding ranches gathered at the saloon, their laughter and arguments spilling into the street. The general store stayed open late, catering to those who worked until sundown. Mary Ellen kept to the boardwalk, nodding to those who acknowledged her, ignoring those who didn't. Inside Porter's general store, she filled her basket with necessities, calculating costs in her head. Money was tight, and getting tighter. The small savings Thomas had left wouldn't last forever, and the ranch produced barely enough to keep her fed, let alone turn a profit. Mrs. Hartley, James Porter, the proprietor, barely looked up from his ledger. That'll be $2.30. She counted out the coins carefully, aware of how few remained in her purse. As she gathered her purchases, the bell above the door chimed. The stranger from this morning entered, bringing with him the scent of leather and trail dust. Up close, she could see what distance had hidden. He was perhaps 30, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a day's worth of stubble darkening his jaw. His clothes were quality beneath the dust, his gun belt worn but well maintained. When he removed his hat, dark hair fell across his forehead in a way that suggested he'd been too long between barber visits. Their eyes met for a moment, and Mary Ellen felt something shift in her chest, a sensation so unexpected she nearly dropped her basket. The stranger nodded, a gesture of courtesy, nothing more, but she found herself frozen in place. Ma'am, he said, his voice low and roughened by trail dust. He stepped aside to let her pass, and she managed to mumble a thank you before fleeing into the street. Her hands trembled as she loaded her purchases into the small wagon she'd driven to town. Foolishness. She was a grown woman, a widow, not some silly girl to be flustered by a stranger's presence. Yet as she drove home through the gathering dusk, she couldn't shake the memory of those storm-gray eyes. The house felt emptier than usual that night. She prepared a simple supper of cornbread and beans, eating in silence broken only by the distant howl of coyotes. When full dark fell, she lit a single lamp, saving oil as always. In bed, she stared at the ceiling and tried not to think about the stranger, tried not to wonder what brought him to Willow Creek, whether he was passing through or staying, tried not to admit that for the first time in 2 years, she'd felt something other than grief and determination. The wind picked up near midnight, rattling the windows and sending dust devils dancing across the yard. Mary Ellen pulled the quilt higher and closed her eyes, but sleep was slow in coming. When it finally arrived, it brought dreams of storm-gray eyes and a voice like distant thunder, speaking words she couldn't quite hear. The Silver Dollar Saloon buzzed with conversation and the clink of glasses as Jack McCade nursed his whiskey at the bar. He'd chosen a spot where he could watch both the door and the room, an old habit that had saved his life more than once. The bartender, a grizzled man with arms like ham hocks, refilled his glass without being asked. "Passing through?" the bartender inquired. making conversation as he wiped down the bar. "Maybe," Jack replied, non-committal. He'd learned that definitive answers led to more questions, and questions were something he preferred to avoid. The saloon doors swung open, admitting a gust of hot air and two cowboys from the Box T Ranch. They glanced at Jack, assessed him as they would a new horse, then dismissed him as no immediate threat. He was content with their conclusion. 3 days in Willow Creek, and already he could map the town's rhythms. Ranchers came in after sundown. Townspeople scattered throughout the day. And always, there was talk about cattle prices, about the weather, about the widow Hartley who stubbornly clung to her dead husband's land. He'd seen her that first day, standing in her doorway like a sentinel, even from a distance. He'd noted the straight line of her spine, the determined set of her shoulders. Yesterday in the general store, up close, he'd been struck by eyes the color of prairie grass and a face that would have been beautiful if it weren't set in such careful lines of control. "Another," the bartender gestured to his empty glass. Jack shook his head, left coins on the bar, and stepped out into the evening air. The sun painted the sky in shades of red and orange, reminding him of other sunsets in other towns, always moving, never staying long enough to let the past catch up. He'd taken a room at Mrs. Finch's boarding house, a clean but Spartan establishment that asked few questions as long as the rent was paid in advance. Tomorrow he'd ride out to the surrounding ranches, see if anyone needed an extra hand. Honest work for honest pay, enough to resupply before moving on. The next morning dawned clear and hot. Jack saddled his bay gelding, dusty, and rode out early, making the rounds of the local ranches. The Box T had no need for extra hands, nor did the Rocking M. It was past noon when he stopped at Murphy's General Store to water his horse and escape the worst of the heat. That's when he saw her again. Mary Ellen Hartley stood beside a wagon loaded with supplies, struggling with a heavy sack of flour. Without thinking, Jack dismounted and approached. "Allow me," he said, reaching for the sack. She jerked back as if burned, then seemed to catch herself. "I can manage." "I'm sure you can," he said mildly, "but there's no shame in accepting help freely offered." For a moment, she studied him with those green eyes, seeming to weigh his motives. Then she stepped back, allowing him to lift the sack into the wagon bed. "Thank you," she said, the words coming reluctantly. "Jack McCade," he offered, touching the brim of his hat. "I know who you are," she said. "The whole town's been talking about the stranger at the Silver Dollar. And your Mrs. Hartley, the whole town's been talking about you too." A flash of something, anger, hurt, crossed her face before she smoothed it away. "I suppose they have good day, Mr. McCade." She climbed onto the wagon seat with practiced ease, but as she reached for the reins, one of the horses shied violently. A rattlesnake, disturbed by their presence, coiled in the shade of the water trough. The horse reared, yanking the wagon sideways. Mary Ellen caught off balance, tumbled from the seat. Jack moved without thinking, catching her before she hit the ground. For a moment, she was in his arms, warm and solid and smelling of soap and sunshine. Their eyes met, held, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with snakes or startled horses. Then she was pushing away, her face flushed. "I'm fine, thank you." Jack had already drawn his pistol, the motion smooth and practiced. One shot, and the snake's head disappeared in a spray of dust. He holstered the weapon and caught the panicked horse's bridle, speaking low and calm until the animal settled. "Good shooting," Mary Ellen said, her voice steadier now. "It's a skill that comes in handy out here." He checked the horse for injury, found none. "Your rig seems sound, though you might want to check that front axle when you get home. Looks like it took some stress." She climbed back onto the seat, this time more carefully. "Are you always this helpful to strangers, Mr. McCade?" "Only on Tuesdays," he said, allowing a small smile. "It's Wednesday, so consider this an exception." Was that almost a smile tugging at her lips before he could be sure? She had the team in motion. Heading out of town, Jack watched until the dust of her passage settled, then became aware of the eyes on him. Half the town, it seemed, had witnessed the interaction. By evening, it would be the talk of the saloon. He was right. That night at the Silver Dollar, conversation stopped when he entered, then resumed with suspicious enthusiasm. Jack ignored the stares and whispers, focusing on his drink and the plate of stew that passed for dinner. "Heard you played hero today," a voice said beside him. Jack turned to find a man in a sheriff's badge, younger than most lawmen but with sharp, knowing eyes. "Sheriff," Jack acknowledged. "Just happened to be in the right place." "Tom Morrison." The sheriff introduced himself. "And in my experience, men like you are rarely in any place by accident." Jack met his gaze steadily. "Man like me. Drifter, gun hand, trouble looking for a place to happen." Morrison's tone was conversational, but the threat was clear. "We're a peaceful town, Mr. McCade. Aim to keep it that way." "I've no quarrel with peace. Sheriff, just looking for work and moving on." Morrison studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "See that you do. Move on. That is, Mrs. Hartley's got troubles enough without adding to them." After the sheriff left, Jack finished his meal in thoughtful silence. He'd been warned off before, in other towns, by other lawmen. Usually, he was happy to comply, but something about this place, about the woman with prairie grass eyes and steel in her spine, made him hesitate. Over the next days, their paths crossed with suspicious frequency. At the general store, where he always seemed to arrive just as she was struggling with heavy loads. At the blacksmith's, where her horse had thrown a shoe at the exact moment he was getting dusty reshod. Each time, she accepted his help with visible reluctance, as if kindness were a debt she couldn't afford to owe. The town watched and whispered, in a place as small as Willow Creek. Every interaction was public property. Jack heard the talk in the saloon, the speculation about the widow and the drifter. Some of it was merely gossip. Some had an uglier edge. "Shameful," he heard Mrs. Morrison, the sheriff's mother, declare in the general store. Her husband not 2 years in the ground, and already making eyes at strange men. "She's struggling," another woman protested weakly. "Maybe she's just grateful for help." "Help," Mrs. Morrison sniffed. "That's what they're calling it now." Jack left before he said something that would make his situation worse, but the injustice of it burned in his gut. Mary Ellen Hartley was the least flirtatious woman he'd ever met. Every interaction was armored in propriety, every word carefully measured. If the town wanted to paint her as a loose woman, they'd do it with or without evidence. The dust storm hit a week after his arrival. Jack saw it coming, a red-brown wall advancing across the plains like the wrath of God. He'd taken shelter in the livery stable, helping the owner secure loose equipment and calm nervous horses. When Mary Ellen's wagon careened into view, she was fighting to control the team, the horses wild-eyed with fear as the wind tore at their manes. Jack ran out, catching the near horse's bridle, using his weight to slow their panicked flight. Together, they managed to get the wagon into the stable just as the storm engulfed the town. Inside, the world turned red and dark. Wind howled through every crack, carrying dust that coated everything, filled lungs, turned the air itself into an enemy. Mary Ellen coughed, pulling a handkerchief from her pocket to cover her nose and mouth. "Here," Jack said, soaking his bandana in the water bucket and handing it to her. "It'll help." She took it without argument, holding it over her face as they huddled with the horses in the relative shelter of the stable. The storm raged for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one, the wind screaming like a living thing. When it finally passed, they emerged to find the town transformed. Dust coated everything in a layer of red-brown grit. tumbleweeds piled against buildings. Someone's chicken coop had been relocated to the middle of Main Street. "Thank you," Mary Ellen said, handing back his bandana. Her hair had come partially loose from its pins, wisps framing her dust-smudged face. "I might not have made it without your help." "You would have managed," Jack said. "You strike me as someone who always manages." "Sometimes," she said quietly. "Managing isn't enough." Then, as if realizing she'd revealed too much, she straightened. "I should go. Check on the animals." "I'll ride with you," Jack offered. "Make sure that axle held up." She looked like she wanted to refuse, but practicality won. "All right." They rode in companionable silence, her wagon and his horse moving through a landscape made alien by the storm. At her ranch, they found minimal damage, a few missing shingles, a section of fence down. The animals had weathered the storm in the barn, frightened but unharmed. "Coffee," she offered, surprising them both. Jack knew he should refuse, knew that accepting would add fuel to the gossip fire. But something in her eyes, a loneliness that matched his own, made him nod. They sat on the porch as the sun set, painting the dust-hazed sky in shades of amber and rose. The coffee was strong and bitter, the silence comfortable. For a moment, Jack could imagine a different life, one where he stayed in one place, where evening coffee with a green-eyed woman was a daily pleasure instead of a dangerous indulgence. "You should go," Mary Ellen said eventually. "Before full dark, people will talk." "People are already talking." "Yes," she agreed. "But I've learned there are degrees of scandal. Coffee on the porch is one thing. A man leaving after dark is another." Jack set down his cup and stood. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. My presence here has made things harder for you." "No," she said firmly. "The town made things hard long before you arrived. You've just given them a new focus for their righteousness." He mounted Dusty, but before leaving, turned back. "Why do you stay? You could sell, start over somewhere else." Mary Ellen looked out over the darkening plains, her face unreadable. "This is my home. I built it with Thomas. Yes, but I've kept it alive with my own hands. Every board, every stone, every fence post represents a choice to keep going. I won't let them drive me away from what I've earned with sweat and stubbornness." Jack touched his hat brim in salute to her courage, her determination, her refusal to bend, and rode away into the gathering darkness. Behind him, Mary Ellen stood on her porch, a solitary figure against the vast emptiness of the plains, as immovable as the mountains on the horizon. The opportunity came through Ben Hutchinson at the Rockingham Ranch. They needed someone to drive a small herd up to the mountain pastures for autumn grazing, a 2-week job that paid decent wages. The pastures bordered Mary Ellen's property, a fact that didn't escape Jack's notice when he accepted the work. He set up camp in a grove of cottonwoods near a spring, the cattle spreading out across the good grass. From his position, he could see the smoke from Mary Ellen's chimney rising in the morning air, could watch her moving about her daily chores like a distant figure in a painting. The isolation suited him. Days passed in the rhythm of watching cattle, mending gear, and maintaining the rough camp. Evenings brought spectacular sunsets that painted the mountains in shades of purple and gold. At night, the stars spread across the sky like scattered diamonds, so bright and numerous they cast shadows. It was the 4th day when Mary Ellen appeared, riding her mare along the property line. Jack was repairing a broken bridle when he spotted her, and something in his chest tightened at the sight. "Mrs. Hartley," he called, standing as she approached. "Mr. McCade." She remained mounted, maintaining the proprieties even out here where only the mountains could see. "I noticed the cattle, Ben Hutchinson's." "Yes, ma'am. Hired me to watch them for a spell." She nodded, her gaze taking in his simple camp. "How do you stand it, the loneliness?" The question surprised him with its directness. After a while, You learn the difference between being alone and being lonely. The first is a choice. The second, he shrugged. And which is this? Started as one, might be turning into the other. Their eyes met, and again that dangerous spark jumped between them. Mary Ellen looked away first, focusing on the distant peaks. I should warn you, there are wildcats in these hills. Lost a calf to one last spring. I'll keep watch. She turned her mare to leave, then paused. I put fresh bread on Saturdays. If you happen to be passing by around noon, there might be an extra loaf. Before he could respond, she was riding away, her back straight as ever. Jack watched until she disappeared over a rise, then returned to his repair work with hands that weren't quite steady. Saturday came clear and bright. Jack told himself he wouldn't go, that it was foolish to encourage something that could only end badly. But as noon approached, he found himself saddling Dusty and riding toward her ranch. She was in the garden when he arrived, kneeling among the struggling vegetables with her sleeves rolled up and dirt on her hands. When she saw him, she stood slowly, brushing soil from her skirt. Mr. McCade, what a surprise. There was a glint in her eye that suggested it was no surprise at all. Jack dismounted, tying Dusty to the fence post. Happened to be in the area. Thought I'd check that fence section we fixed after the storm. Of course, and it's nearly noon. You must be hungry. They maintained the fiction of coincidence as she led him to the house. Inside, the smell of fresh bread filled the air, along with something else. Rabbit stew, if his nose was right. She'd prepared a meal for two, despite her pretense of surprise. They ate at her small table. The conversation careful at first, then gradually warming. Jack found himself telling her about places he'd seen, the endless grass of Kansas, the mountains of Colorado, the desert blooms of Arizona. She listened with hungry attention, someone who'd never been more than 50 miles from where she was born. Thomas promised we'd travel, she said, a wistful note in her voice. After we got the ranch established, see San Francisco, maybe even Chicago. She shook her head. Foolish dreams. Not foolish, just postponed. For how long, until I'm too old to sit a horse, until the ranch finally breaks me? She caught herself, color rising in her cheeks. I'm sorry. I don't mean to burden you with my complaints. It's not a burden, Jack said quietly. Sometimes it helps to speak things aloud, makes them smaller, more manageable. She studied him across the table. You sound like you know something about carrying weight. We all have our loads, Mrs. Hartley. Mary Ellen, she corrected. If we're going to be friends, you might as well use my given name when we're alone. At least, friends. The word hung between them, defining boundaries even as it acknowledged a connection. Jack nodded. Mary Ellen, then, and I'm Jack. After the meal, they sat on the porch with coffee, the afternoon stretching lazy and golden. Mary Ellen talked about the ranch, the daily struggles and small victories. Jack mostly listened, offering occasional observations or suggestions. The creek's running low, she mentioned. If it dries up completely, I'll have to drive the stock to the river every day. Don't know how I'll manage that alone. Might be able to dam it upstream, Jack suggested. Create a deeper pool that would last longer. I could take a look, if you'd like. She hesitated, then nodded. I'd appreciate that. They walked to the creek, following its meandering course upstream. Jack pointed out places where strategic placement of rocks and logs could slow the water's flow, creating holding pools. Mary Ellen asked intelligent questions, revealing a sharp mind behind her reserved demeanor. At one point, she slipped on a wet rock. Jack caught her arm, steadying her, and for a moment they stood close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her green eyes, could smell the lavender soap she used. Careful, he said, his voice rougher than intended. Yes, she agreed, and he wasn't sure if she meant the rocks or something else entirely. As the sun began its descent, Jack knew he should leave, but Mary Ellen suggested they rest by the creek before heading back, and he found himself unable to refuse. They sat on a fallen log, the water murmuring past their feet, the world peaceful in the way only wild places could be. "Tell me about him," Jack said suddenly. "Thomas." Mary Ellen looked surprised, then thoughtful. "He was a good man, steady, reliable. We grew up together, our families neighboring. When he proposed, everyone said what a sensible match it was. 2 farming families joining their lands." "Did you love him?" The question was too personal, too dangerous, but she answered anyway. "I cared for him deeply. We were partners, companions, but love—" She picked up a pebble, tossed it into the creek. "I thought what we had was love. Now, I'm not sure I knew what the word meant. And now," she turned to look at him, and what he saw in her eyes made his breath catch. "Now I think love might be something wilder, something that doesn't ask permission or wait for the proper time, something that burns even when you try to bank the fire." The air between them crackled with possibility. Jack found himself leaning closer, drawn by forces stronger than wisdom. Mary Ellen didn't pull away. Her lips parted slightly, her breath quick and shallow. Then a gunshot cracked across the evening air. They jerked apart, Jack already on his feet, hand moving to his pistol. The shot had come from the direction of the cattle herd. Without a word, they ran for the horses, Jack lifting Mary Ellen into her saddle before mounting Dusty. They rode hard toward the mountain pastures, the dying light making shadows treacherous. As they crested the rise above Jack's camp, they could see the cattle milling in panic, several riders working to scatter them. "Rustlers," Jack said grimly. "Stay here." But Mary Ellen was already spurring her mare forward. "Those are Hutchinson's cattle. He's my neighbor. I won't stand by while thieves rob him." Jack cursed but followed. As they thundered down the slope, one of the rustlers spotted them and shouted a warning. Guns swung their way, muzzle flashes bright in the gathering dusk. Jack drew and fired in one smooth motion, his shot taking one rustler from the saddle. Mary Ellen, to his amazement, had produced a rifle from her saddle scabbard and was firing with calm precision, forcing the thieves to scatter. The rustlers, apparently unprepared for resistance, broke and ran. Jack pursued for a short distance, ensuring they were truly fleeing, then returned to find Mary Ellen calming the spooked cattle with soft words and steady hands. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" he asked. "Thomas taught me. Said a woman alone should know how to defend herself." She looked at the fallen rustler, her face pale but determined. "Never thought I'd need to." They worked together to gather the scattered cattle, checking for injuries. By the time they finished, full dark had fallen, the stars providing just enough light to see. "You'll stay at the house tonight," Mary Ellen said, her tone brooking no argument. "It's too dark to make camp, and those rustlers might come back." Jack knew he should refuse, knew that her reputation, already fragile, couldn't survive a man spending the night. But the adrenaline of the fight was still singing in his veins, and the thought of leaving her alone with rustlers possibly returning overrode caution. "I'll sleep in the barn," he compromised. At her ranch, they tended the horses in companionable silence. As Jack gathered blankets for his bed in the hayloft, Mary Ellen appeared with a bundle extra quilts, a pillow, and a covered plate of food. "Thank you," she said softly, "for today, for everything." "Mary Ellen," he began, not sure what he wanted to say. She stepped closer, reaching up to touch his face. Her fingers were gentle against his cheek, and he closed his eyes at the contact. "I know," she whispered. "I know all the reasons this is impossible, but just for tonight, I wanted—" She trailed off, then stood on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was brief, tender, tasting of possibilities and regret. When she pulled away, tears glinted in her eyes. "Good night, Jack." She fled before he could respond, leaving him standing in the barn with the memory of her lips and the echo of things unsaid. Above in the loft, he lay awake for hours, staring at the stars through gaps in the roof and wondering how a simple job watching cattle had become something that threatened to reshape his entire world. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the darkness, their voices wild and free. Jack listened and understood their language, the call of creatures who belonged to no one but themselves, who ran where they wished beneath the vast western sky. But tonight, for the first time in years, that freedom felt less like liberation and more like loneliness. Somewhere in the house, Mary Ellen was likely lying awake too, wrestling with the same dangerous feelings, two souls, each carrying their own burdens, drawn together by something stronger than sense or propriety. And overhead, the mountains stood eternal and impassive, keeping their silence about what tomorrow might bring. The morning after the rustler attack dawned gray and cool, autumn asserting itself over the Wyoming plains. Jack woke in the hayloft to the sound of Mary Ellen moving about below, tending to the morning chores. He descended quietly, finding her milking the cow, her movements practiced and efficient. "Coffee's on the stove," she said without looking up. "Help yourself." The careful distance in her voice told him she'd spent the night rebuilding her walls. Jack understood. In the harsh light of day, last night's kiss seemed like temporary madness, a moment of weakness they'd both regret. Over breakfast, they maintained polite conversation about the rustlers, the need to inform Sheriff Morrison, the damage to Hutchinson's herd. Neither mentioned the kiss or the words spoken by the creek. When Jack left to check on the remaining cattle and report to town, Mary Ellen merely nodded farewell, her expression carefully neutral. In Willow Creek, Jack found the sheriff at his office, feet propped on his desk, studying a stack of wanted posters. Morrison looked up as Jack entered, his eyes sharpening. "McCade, heard there was some shooting up at the mountain pastures last night." "Rustlers," Jack confirmed. "3 of them, trying for Hutchinson's herd. Misses. Hartley and I drove them off." Morrison's feet hit the floor. Mrs. Hartley was involved. "She was visiting her property line when it happened." "Woman can shoot." "I'll bet she can," Morrison muttered. But there was something in his tone that made Jack bristle. The sheriff noticed his reaction and held up a hand. "No offense meant. Just seems like trouble follows some folks around." "The only trouble following Mrs. Hartley is what this town keeps trying to heap on her doorstep," Jack said, his voice hard. Morrison studied him for a long moment. "Speaking of trouble following folks," he pulled a poster from the stack, slid it across the desk. "This wouldn't be you, would it?" Jack looked down at his own face staring back from the paper. The sketch was poor, but recognizable. "Wanted for murder, Jacob McCade, $500 reward." "Says here Jacob McCade killed a man in Amarillo 2 years back," Morrison continued conversationally. "Shot him in cold blood over a card game. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you, Jack?" Jack met the sheriff's gaze steadily. "The name's common enough." "So's the face, apparently." Morrison leaned back. "Funny thing about wanted posters. Sometimes they tell the whole truth. Sometimes they only tell the part somebody wants known. And which do you think this is?" "Haven't decided yet." Morrison picked up the poster, seemed to consider it, then deliberately tore it in half. "But I know this much. You've been straight with me so far. Helped protect Hutchinson's property. Haven't caused trouble. Man's past is his own business, long as it stays in the past. And if it doesn't, then we'll have a different conversation." Morrison's expression was grave. "But McCade, whatever you're running from, don't let it land on her doorstep. Mary Ellen Hartley's had enough sorrow for one lifetime." Jack left the sheriff's office with his thoughts churning. Morrison knew, or at least suspected. How long before others made the connection? How long before his past caught up and destroyed not just him, but anyone close to him? He spent the rest of the day with the cattle, But his mind kept returning to that wanted poster. The charge was murder. True enough, but the poster left out crucial details, like how Garrett Sinclair had been cheating at cards for hours, fleecing cowboys and merchants alike, how he'd pulled a hideout gun when finally called on it, how Jack had been faster, his bullet finding Sinclair's heart before the cheater could fire. It had been a fair fight by any Western standard, but Sinclair's father owned half of Amarillo, including the sheriff. The trial had been a foregone conclusion, so Jack had run 2 years of drifting, never staying long enough to put down roots, always watching his back trail. As evening approached, he spotted a rider approaching his camp. His hand moved to his gun, then relaxed as he recognized Ben Hutchinson's stocky form. McCade. Hutchinson greeted him, dismounting heavily. Heard about last night. Come to thank you. Just doing the job you hired me for. Maybe so, but not every man would have risked his neck for another man's cattle. Hutchinson pulled out a leather pouch, heavy with coins. Your wages, plus a bonus. You've more than earned it. Jack accepted the payment with a nod. What about the rustlers? Sheriff's got men out looking, but they're probably long gone. These hills are full of hiding places. Hutchinson paused, seeming to debate something. Also heard Mary Ellen Hartley was with you. She was... Good woman, Mary Ellen. Shame how this town treats her sometimes. Hutchinson's weathered face was thoughtful. Known her since she was a girl. She deserves better than whispers and cold shoulders. Yes, Jack agreed quietly. She does. Hutchinson remounted, then looked down at Jack. Job's yours as long as you want it. Could use a man who's handy with a gun and not afraid to use it righteously. Winter's coming on, and these rustlers might try again. After Hutchinson left, Jack sat by his campfire as darkness fell. The job offer was tempting. Steady work through winter. A reason to stay that had nothing to do with green eyes and sunshine hair. But staying meant risking discovery, meant putting Mary Ellen in danger from association with him. He was still wrestling with the decision when he heard horses approaching. Multiple riders, moving with purpose. Jack doused his fire and melted into the shadows, rifle in hand. 4 men materialized from the darkness, badges glinting in the moonlight. A posse, but not from Willow Creek. These men had the hard look of professionals, manhunters who tracked human prey for profit. Know he's around here somewhere, one said. Bartender in town said a man matching the description has been working these hills. $500, another added. Split 4 ways. That's good money. They made camp not far from Jack's position, confident in their numbers. Jack waited, patient as a hunting cat, until they'd settled for the night. Then he crept to where they'd picketed their horses, spoke softly to calm them, and carefully loosened their tethers. A thrown rock sent the horses scattering into the night, their riders cursing and stumbling in pursuit. By the time they'd rounded up their mounts, Jack was long gone, pushing Dusty hard toward Mary Ellen's ranch. If bounty hunters were in the area, she needed to know. They might use her to get to him. He found her house dark, but a light burned in the barn. Inside, he discovered her struggling with a cow in difficult labor, her dress soaked with sweat and straw despite the cool night. Jack! Relief flooded her face. Thank God. I can't manage alone. She's been like this for hours. Questions could wait. Jack shed his coat and joined her in the stall. Together they worked through the night, fighting to save both cow and calf. It was nearly dawn when the calf finally arrived, weak but alive, and the exhausted cow began to nurse. Mary Ellen sagged against the stall wall, tears of relief streaming down her face. I thought I'd lose them both. You did good, Jack said, wrapping his coat around her shaking shoulders. Couldn't have done better myself. She looked up at him, and in the lamplight he could see the toll the night had taken, the shadows under her eyes, the lines of strain around her mouth. Without thinking, he reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face. Jack, she whispered, what are we doing? I don't know, he admitted. But Mary Ellen, there's something you need to know. There are men looking for me, bounty hunters. I'm wanted in Texas. Instead of pulling away, she moved closer. For what? He told her everything. Sinclair, the rigged trial, 2 years of running. She listened without interrupting, her eyes never leaving his face. So you killed a man who was trying to kill you, and now they call you a murderer. Her voice was matter-of-fact. The law isn't always the same as justice, is it? You believe me? Yes. Simple, direct, no hesitation. What will you do? Leave, tonight, before they connect me to you. No. She gripped his arm. Running isn't living, Jack. It's just delayed dying. It's better than bringing trouble to your door. Trouble's been at my door since Thomas died. At least this trouble comes with a man She stopped, color flooding her cheeks. Mary Ellen, I know we barely know each other. I know it's too fast, too complicated. But when you're here, I remember what it feels like to be alive instead of just surviving. Her voice dropped to a whisper. When you touched me yesterday, when you kissed me back, I felt my heart beat for the first time in 2 years. Jack pulled her into his arms, holding her as the morning sun painted the barn gold. She fit against him perfectly, her head tucked under his chin, her body warm and yielding. This can't end well, he warned. Maybe not, she agreed. But I'm tired of living for endings. Maybe it's time to live for beginnings. Outside, a rooster crowed, announcing the new day. Soon the town would wake, the gossips would gather, and the world would intrude with all its judgments and dangers. But for now, in the quiet of the barn, with new life breathing beside them, Jack and Mary Ellen held each other and pretended that love might be stronger than the forces arrayed against them. Stay, she whispered against his chest. Not forever, not even for long. Just stay. Jack closed his eyes, knowing he was making a choice that would change everything. All right, he said. For now. It was a promise as fragile as the newborn calf, as dangerous as the loaded gun on his hip. But as Mary Ellen lifted her face for his kiss, Jack thought that some things might be worth the risk. Even if the past was riding hard behind him, even if the future held nothing but sorrow. For now, in this moment, with this woman in his arms, he would stay. The decision came 3 days later, after the bounty hunters had given up their search and moved on. Jack stood in Mary Ellen's kitchen, watching her knead bread dough with practiced movements, flour dusting her arms like snow. The domestic scene was so peaceful, so perfect, that it made his chest ache with longing for things he couldn't have. I need to go to Denver, he said quietly. Her hand stilled on the dough. When? Tomorrow. There's a lawyer there, Marcus Hartwell. He helped a friend of mine with a similar situation. If anyone can find a way to clear my name, it's him. Mary Ellen resumed kneading, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. How long? 2 weeks, maybe 3. I'll need to gather evidence. Find witnesses if any are still alive. He moved closer, wanting to touch her but holding back. Mary Ellen, I can't ask you to wait. You're not asking. She turned to face him, flour-covered hands on her hips. I'm choosing. There's a difference. The town will talk. Let them. Their words can't hurt me any more than their silence already has. She wiped her hands on her apron, leaving white streaks. What can I do to help? Keep yourself safe. If more bounty hunters come asking questions. I never saw you. You were just another drifter passing through. Her smile was sad but determined. I've gotten good at telling people what they expect to hear. That evening, they sat on her porch as they had so many times before, watching the sun paint the mountains crimson. Jack had moved his few belongings from the mountain camp, his saddlebags packed and ready for morning. Dusty grazed in the corral beside Mary Ellen's horses. the animals having accepted each other with the ease their humans couldn't quite manage. "Tell me about Denver," Mary Ellen said. "I've never been to a real city." Jack described the bustling streets, the grand hotels, the mountains rising like walls to the west. He talked about the opera house, the restaurants, the shops filled with goods from around the world. Mary Ellen listened with the same hungry attention she always showed when he spoke of places beyond Willow Creek. "Maybe someday you'll see it for yourself," he said. "Maybe." She pulled her shawl tighter against the evening chill. "Jack, what if Hartwell can't help? What if clearing your name isn't possible?" He'd been asking himself the same question. "Then I keep running. Find somewhere farther west, maybe California or Oregon, somewhere the past can't follow. Alone." The question hung between them like a challenge. Jack turned to look at her, seeing the courage it had taken to ask. That would depend. On what? On whether a certain widow might consider a life far from everything she's known. Whether she could leave this land she's fought so hard to keep. Mary Ellen was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. "This morning, I stood in my kitchen and realized something. This house, this land, I've been treating them like a shrine to Thomas. Like if I just held on tight enough, I could keep some part of him alive." She looked at Jack, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "But he's gone. Has been for 2 years. And I've been so busy being his widow that I forgot to be myself." "Mary Ellen, I'm not saying I'd leave tomorrow. But if you came back and asked, I might surprise us both with my answer." Jack reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. Her skin was rough from work, calloused and strong, but her touch was gentle. They sat in silence as darkness fell, each lost in thoughts of possible futures. Later, as Jack prepared to leave, Mary Ellen pressed a small leather pouch into his hand. "For expenses," she said, forestalling his protest. "It's not charity, it's an investment in possibility." The pouch was heavy with coins, her savings, he realized. Money she'd scraped together through 2 years of hardship. "I can't—" "You can and you will." Her voice brooked no argument. "Pride is a luxury neither of us can afford right now." He pulled her close, kissing her deeply, pouring all his unspoken promises into the contact. When they parted, both were breathing hard. "Come back to me," she whispered. "Always," he promised, knowing even as he said it that the world had a way of breaking such vows. Jack left before dawn, Dusty's hoofbeats muffled by the heavy dew. He looked back once to see Mary Ellen standing in her doorway, a pale figure against the dark house, watching him go. Then he turned his face toward Denver and whatever justice might wait there. The journey took 4 days of hard riding. Jack avoided the main roads when possible, camping cold to avoid attention. The plains gave way to foothills, then to the true mountains, peaks already white with early snow. Denver sprawled in a valley, smoke from countless chimneys creating a haze that hung over the city like a shroud. Marcus Hartwell's office occupied the 2nd floor of a respectable building on Larimer Street. Jack climbed the stairs with trepidation, aware that he was placing his life in the hands of a man he'd never met, based only on a friend's recommendation. Hartwell proved to be a small, neat man with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He listened to Jack's story without interruption, occasionally making notes in precise handwriting. "The Sinclair case," he said when Jack finished. "I remember reading about it. Garrett Sinclair was known even here as a cheat and a bully. His father, however—" Hartwell shook his head. "Powerful men make dangerous enemies. Mr. McCade. Can anything be done? Perhaps the key would be finding witnesses to the actual event. Men who saw Sinclair draw first, who could testify to his cheating." Hartwell consulted his notes. "You said this happened at the Broken Spoke Saloon." "Yes, it was crowded that night. At least a dozen men saw what happened." "And how many would be willing to stand up in court against the Sinclair family?" Hartwell's expression was sympathetic but realistic. "Fear is a powerful silencer. Mr. McCade. Jack thought of Mary Ellen, waiting and hoping. What do you need me to do? I'll send inquiries to Amarillo, discreetly. In the meantime, write down everything you remember. Every detail, every name, every face. Memory fades, but written records endure. Hartwell stood, extending his hand. I make no promises, but I'll do what I can. Jack spent the next days in a cheap boarding house, writing page after page of recollections. The incident was burned into his memory, Sinclair's sneer as he palmed cards, the moment of deadly silence when Jack called him on it, the flash of nickel-plated steel as Sinclair went for his hideout gun. Between writing sessions, he walked Denver's streets, marveling at the city's energy. Everywhere, construction and commerce, the sound of hammers and the calls of merchants. It was a city building itself, creating something from nothing through sheer will and ambition. He thought Mary Ellen would love the bookshops, the dress stores with their window displays, the restaurants serving food from a dozen nations. A week passed before Hartwell summoned him back. The lawyer's expression was carefully neutral as he gestured Jack to a chair. I've had responses to my inquiries, Hartwell began. The news is mixed. Jack's heart sank. Tell me. 3 men have agreed to provide sworn statements that Sinclair drew first. They saw him go for the hideout gun, saw you fire in self-defense. Hartwell adjusted his spectacles. However, they'll only do so if guaranteed protection from reprisal. They want to testify in Denver, not Amarillo, before a judge with no connection to the Sinclair family. Can that be arranged? Possibly. I've spoken with Judge Patterson here. He's willing to review the case, potentially issue a ruling that would clear your name, but... Hartwell paused. Old man Sinclair has increased the bounty. It's now $1,000. He wants you badly. Mr. McCade. $1,000. Enough to bring every bounty hunter west of the Mississippi looking for him. Jack thought of Mary Ellen, alone and vulnerable on her ranch. How long would this legal process take? If we can get the witnesses here safely, 6 weeks, perhaps 2 months. The question is whether you can stay hidden that long. Jack made his decision. Do it. Whatever it costs, whatever it takes. I need this resolved. Hartwell nodded slowly. Very well. I'll need a retainer. He named a sum that would take most of Mary Ellen's money. Jack paid without hesitation. Where will you stay while we wait? Hartwell asked. Not in Denver, too visible. Jack stood, settling his hat. I know a place. Send word to Willow Creek when you need me. The ride back seemed longer, worry making every mile drag. What if the witnesses changed their minds? What if Sinclair's money proved stronger than truth? What if bounty hunters had already traced him to Willow Creek? He pushed Dusty hard the last day, needing to see Mary Ellen, to know she was safe. The ranch appeared in late afternoon, peaceful in the autumn light. Smoke rose from the chimney. The horses grazed in the corral. Everything exactly as he'd left it. Mary Ellen must have been watching for him. She burst from the house as he dismounted, flying into his arms with an abandon that would have shocked the proper citizens of Willow Creek. You came back, she breathed against his neck. I promised, he replied, holding her tight. Inside, over coffee and the dinner she'd kept warm in hope of his return. Jack told her everything. She listened intently, her expression shifting from hope to worry and back again. 2 months, she repeated, and then we'll know. Either I'm a free man, or... He didn't finish. They both knew the alternative. Mary Ellen reached across the table, taking his hands. Then we wait, together. Mary Ellen, I can't stay here. If they track me to Willow Creek, you could be charged with harboring a fugitive. Let me worry about that. Her grip tightened. Jack McCade, I've spent 2 years in this house with nothing but ghosts for company. I'm not sending you away now. We'll be careful. We'll be smart. But you're staying. looking into her determined face. Jack felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope, not just for legal redemption, but for a life beyond running. A future that included this remarkable woman who saw past his wanted posters to the man beneath. "All right," he said, "we wait together." Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, white flakes drifting past the windows like promises. Winter was coming to Wyoming, bringing with it isolation and hardship, but also, perhaps, a chance for new beginnings, as clean and unmarked as fresh snow. The first sign of trouble came on a crisp November morning. Jack was repairing the chicken coop when he heard riders approaching, too many to be friendly visitors. He grabbed his rifle and moved to the barn's shadow, watching as 5 men rode into Mary Ellen's yard. The leader was a thin man with pale eyes and a deputy's badge. Behind him rode 4 hard cases, their hands resting casual-like on their guns, bounty hunters, but with a veneer of legality. Mary Ellen emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Deputy Marshal Griggs. The thin man announced. "Looking for a man might have passed through here. Goes by Jack McCade." "Lots of men pass through," Mary Ellen said calmly. "This is a working ranch. I hire help when I can find it." Griggs dismounted, his spurs jingling. "This particular man is wanted for murder. Dangerous. You'd remember him if you'd seen him. I make it a point not to ask too many questions of drifters willing to work for wages." Mary Ellen's voice held just the right amount of indifference. "What's this man supposed to look like?" As Griggs described Jack, his men spread out, checking the barn, the outbuildings. Jack held his breath, grateful he'd been camping in a hidden grove a mile from the ranch. His possessions were there, along with Dusty. To anyone searching, he was just another ghost on the wind. "Mind if we look around?" Griggs asked, though he was already moving toward the house. "I'd prefer you didn't," Mary Ellen said, steel entering her voice. A woman alone has few enough protections without men tramping through her home uninvited. Griggs paused, perhaps remembering the proprieties. "Of course, ma'am, but if this McCade shows up, you'd be wise to send word. He's killed before. Wouldn't want you to be next." "I'll keep that in mind." The hunters searched for another hour, finding nothing. Jack watched them ride away, fury and fear warring in his chest. They were getting closer. Worse, they were willing to threaten Mary Ellen. He waited until dusk before returning to the house. Mary Ellen met him at the door, her face pale but composed. "They'll be back," she said simply. "I know. I should leave. Lead them away from here." "No." She gripped his arms. "Running now would only confirm their suspicions. We knew this might happen." That night, they made plans. Jack would stay in the hidden grove, coming to the house only after dark. They worked out signals. A white cloth in the east window meant danger. A lamp in the barn meant all clear. It was a harder life, but bearable knowing it was temporary. 2 weeks passed in this careful dance. Then came the night that changed everything. Jack woke to the smell of smoke. Through the trees, he could see an orange glow where Mary Ellen's ranch should be. He was on Dusty and riding before fully awake, rifle in hand, heart pounding with terror. The barn was fully engulfed, flames leaping into the night sky. Mary Ellen stood in the yard in her nightdress, trying desperately to free the horses. Without hesitation, Jack plunged into the smoke, helping her lead the terrified animals to safety. "The house!" he shouted over the roar of flames. Still safe. It started in the barn. I smelled kerosene. A shot cracked through the night. Jack spun, pushing Mary Ellen behind him as more shots followed. Muzzle flashes revealed positions. At least 3 shooters, positioned to catch anyone fleeing the fire. "Inside," Jack ordered, half carrying Mary Ellen to the house as bullets whined past. They crashed through the door, Jack immediately moving to the window. In the fire's light, he could see figures moving, trying to flank the house. "They're trying to smoke us out," he said grimly. "Force us into the open." Mary Ellen had retrieved Thomas's rifle from above the mantel. "Then we make them pay for it." The siege began. The attackers had the advantage of darkness beyond the fire's reach, but Jack and Mary Ellen had cover and desperation. Jack's rifle spoke with deadly precision, dropping one attacker who got too eager. Mary Ellen guarded the back windows, her shots keeping the hunters from circling behind. "McCade," a voice called from the darkness. "Not Griggs. Someone else. You're done for. Come out and face justice." "Who's justice?" Jack shouted back. "Sinclair's bought and paid for kind." Another volley of shots answered him. Glass shattered, showering them with fragments. Mary Ellen cried out, blood running from a cut on her cheek. "You're hit." Jack moved toward her, but she waved him back. "It's nothing. Watch the windows." The barn's roof collapsed in a shower of sparks, illuminating the yard like hellish daylight. In that moment, Jack saw him, a man creeping toward the house with a torch, planning to set the roof ablaze. Jack's shot took him center mass. The torch fell, sputtering out in the dirt, but more were coming. Too many to stop. Soon they'd be overrun or burned out. Then, impossibly, new gunfire erupted from the darkness, not aimed at the house, at the attackers. Jack heard shouts of alarm, saw muzzle flashes from unexpected directions. The hunters, suddenly hunted themselves, began falling back. "What's happening?" Mary Ellen whispered. Before Jack could answer, horses thundered into the yard. Sheriff Morrison led the charge, badge glinting in the firelight, gun blazing. Behind him rode a half-dozen townsmen, including Ben Hutchinson and, surprisingly, James Porter from the general store. The bounty hunters, caught between two forces, broke and ran. Some made it to their horses and fled. Others threw down their weapons, hands raised in surrender. Morrison dismounted, covering the captured men while his posse secured them. "Mrs. Hartley McCade, you folks all right in there?" Jack and Mary Ellen emerged cautiously. The barn was a total loss, still burning but no longer threatening the house. In the firelight, neighbors worked to contain the blaze, forming bucket brigades from the well. "How?" Jack asked Morrison. The sheriff spat tobacco juice. Porter saw strangers buying kerosene, asking questions about the widow Hartley. Figured trouble was brewing. "We've been watching since sundown." He looked at the burning barn. "Sorry we weren't faster." "You saved our lives," Mary Ellen said quietly. Morrison turned to Jack. "This doesn't change your situation. McCade, you're still wanted. But burning folks out, attacking women, that's not justice. That's murder attempted." He gestured to the captured hunters. "These boys are going to have a nice long stay in my jail." As dawn broke, the damage became clear. The barn was gone, along with most of their winter feed. The house bore bullet scars and broken windows, but they were alive. And more importantly, the town had stood with them. Neighbors who'd barely spoken to Mary Ellen in 2 years now worked alongside her, clearing debris, offering lumber and labor to rebuild. Women who'd crossed streets to avoid her brought food and bandages for her cuts. "Seems nearly dying together breaks down some barriers," Ben Hutchinson observed, directing men as they cleared the barn's foundation. "Should have happened sooner. Without the dying part, I mean." Jack worked with the men, grateful but wary. This reprieve was temporary. Sinclair would send more hunters, better prepared, more ruthless. The $1,000 bounty ensured that. That evening, as volunteers finally headed home, Jack and Mary Ellen sat on the porch steps, exhausted and filthy but alive. The acrid smell of smoke still hung heavy in the air. "They burned Thomas's barn," Mary Ellen said softly. "The last thing he built." "I'm sorry." She leaned against his shoulder. "I'm not. It was just wood and nails. What matters is what survived." She looked up at him. "You could have run when the shooting started, led them away from here." "No," Jack said firmly. "I couldn't." "Why?" He turned to face her fully, cupping her soot-smudged face in his hands. because somewhere between that first day in the general store and now, running stopped being an option. I'd rather die defending you than live knowing I'd left you to face danger alone. Tears tracked through the dirt on her cheeks. Jack McCade, you impossible man, you've ruined my reputation, brought gunmen to my door, cost me my barn. I know. I'm sorry. She silenced him with a kiss, fierce and desperate. And I wouldn't change a moment of it. Do you hear me? Not one moment. In the distance, coyotes called to each other, their voices wild and free. The ranch bore scars now, burned ground where the barn had stood, bullet holes in the house walls. But scars meant survival. Scars meant you'd fought and lived to tell the tale. Morrison was right. Jack said eventually, "This doesn't change my situation. They'll keep coming. Then we'll keep fighting." Mary Ellen's voice held no doubt, no hesitation. "Until your lawyer finds justice or we run out of ammunition. Either way, we face it together." Jack pulled her close, breathing in the scent of smoke and courage. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, rebuilding, watching for the next threat, waiting for word from Denver. But tonight, they were alive and together, and that was miracle enough. Above them, stars emerged as the last smoke cleared, distant and eternal, bearing witness to the small human dramas played out beneath their light. And somewhere in those stars, Jack thought he saw a promise that love forged in fire might prove stronger than the forces trying to tear it apart. The letter from Denver arrived on a cold December morning, brought by a rider who didn't linger for pleasantries. Jack's hands trembled slightly as he broke the seal. Mary Ellen reading over his shoulder. "The witnesses have testified," Jack read aloud. "Judge Patterson has reviewed the evidence and issued his ruling. The killing of Garrett Sinclair was justified self-defense. All charges dropped. The warrant for your arrest has been vacated." Mary Ellen let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for weeks. "It's over." "The legal matter, yes." Jack folded the letter carefully. "But Sinclair's father, men like him don't care much for legal rulings when blood debt is involved." Despite the lingering threat, a weight had lifted. Jack McCade was no longer a wanted man in the eyes of the law. He could walk down any street, enter any town, without fearing the sheriff's knock. It was a freedom he'd almost forgotten existed. That Sunday, they attended church together for the first time. The congregation's reaction was mixed. Some nodded acknowledgement. Others maintained their cold shoulders. Reverend Patterson, a man who believed more in redemption than judgment, welcomed them warmly. "Love thy neighbor," he preached, his eyes moving meaningfully over certain members of his flock. Not just the neighbors you approve of, not just the ones who live as you think they should. All neighbors, especially those who have faced trials and tribulations. After the service, Sarah Morrison, the sheriff's wife, approached them. "Mary Ellen, Mr. McCade, would you join us for Sunday dinner?" It was an olive branch, publicly offered. Mary Ellen accepted graciously, and that afternoon found them at the Morrison table, sharing roast beef and cautious conversation. By the meal's end, some invisible barrier had crumbled. Sarah was laughing at Jack's stories of trail life, while the sheriff offered advice on rebuilding the barn. The work began the next week. This time, it wasn't just neighbors helping from duty. It was a community coming together. The barn rose from the ashes of the old, built stronger and better. Jack worked alongside the men, earning their respect with his skill and tireless effort. Mary Ellen kept the workers fed, her kitchen a constant hub of activity. "Never thought I'd see the day," Martha Hutchinson confided to Mary Ellen as they served lunch to the work crew. "This town can be hard on those who don't fit the mold, but you've endured, and that matters to folks." "I had help," Mary Ellen said, her eyes finding Jack among the workers. Martha smiled. "Yes, you did, and that matters too. A good man is worth fighting for. Convention be damned." As the barn neared completion, Jack made a decision. He found Mary Ellen in the garden. coaxing the last vegetables from the near-frozen ground. "I need to go to town," he said. "Alone. There's business to tend to." She studied his face, then nodded. "Be careful." In Willow Creek, Jack first visited the bank, then the lawyer who handled property matters. His final stop was the general store, where he made a purchase that set tongues wagging before he'd even left town. That evening, as they walked along the creek despite the cold, Jack stopped beneath a cottonwood whose bare branches reached toward the stars. "Mary Ellen," he began, then had to clear his throat and start again. "These past months have shown me something I never expected to find. A home, not just a place, but a person to share it with." He dropped to one knee in the frost-brittle grass, producing a small ring-simple gold with a modest stone, all he could afford but chosen with care. "I know I'm not what you planned. I'm not a farmer born to this land. I've got more past than future, and shadows that might follow me all my days. But I love you with everything I have, and I swear I'll spend whatever time we're given trying to make you happy. Will you marry me?" Mary Ellen's hand covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. For a terrifying moment, Jack thought she might refuse. Then she was pulling him to his feet, kissing him with desperate joy. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes, Jack McCade. With all your shadows and past and uncertain future, yes." They were married 2 weeks later, on a bright January day when fresh snow made the world clean and new. The church was fuller than anyone expected, the town turning out to witness the union of the widow and the former outlaw. Reverend Patterson performed the ceremony with genuine warmth, speaking of second chances and the redemptive power of love. Mary Ellen wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, with winter roses in her hair. Jack stood at the altar in a new suit, looking uncomfortable but determined. When they exchanged vows, his voice was steady and sure. "I, Jack, take you, Mary Ellen, to be my wife, to stand beside you in sunshine and shadow, in plenty and in want, in joy and sorrow. I promise to protect you, provide for you, and cherish you all the days of my life." Mary Ellen's response was equally firm. "I, Mary Ellen, take you, Jack, to be my husband, to stand beside you wherever the trail leads, in peace and in trouble, in certainty and doubt. I promise to love you, support you, and face whatever comes with you by my side." The reception was held at the newly rebuilt barn, decorated with winter greenery and warmed by pot-bellied stoves. The townspeople had contributed food and music, turning it into a true community celebration. Even Mrs. Morrison, the sheriff's mother who had been among Mary Ellen's harshest critics, offered congratulations and a wedding quilt. As Jack and Mary Ellen danced to the fiddle's tune, Sheriff Morrison approached. "Telegram came this morning," he said quietly. "Thought you should know. Old man Sinclair died last week. Heart gave out." Jack absorbed this news, feeling another weight lift. "His sons?" "More interested in the estate than revenge. From what I hear, seems your particular debt might have died with the old man." It was more than they dared hope. As the sheriff moved away, Jack pulled Mary Ellen closer. "Did you hear?" "I heard." She looked up at him, eyes bright. "It's really over, isn't it, all of it?" "The running is," Jack agreed. "The rest our life together, that's just beginning." They spent their wedding night in the house that had sheltered Mary Ellen's grief and now would harbor their joy. Outside, winter wind howled across the plains, but inside was warmth and laughter and the quiet intimacy of two people who had found each other against all odds. In the weeks that followed, they settled into married life with surprising ease. Jack proved as capable a rancher as he'd been a horseman, bringing new ideas and energy to the struggling operation. Mary Ellen blossomed under the security of partnership, no longer bearing every burden alone. The town, too, adjusted. Where once Mary Ellen had been the tragic widow, now she was Mrs. McCade, half of a couple that had earned respect through trial by fire. Jack's past faded into legend, Just another story of the frontier where men could remake themselves through courage and hard work. Spring came early that year, melting snow revealing green grass eager for sunshine. Jack and Mary Ellen stood together on their porch, watching the land wake from winter's sleep. "No regrets?" Jack asked, as he did sometimes, still hardly believing his good fortune. "None," Mary Ellen assured him, as she always did. "Except perhaps that we didn't find each other sooner. Maybe we weren't ready sooner. Maybe we needed our separate trials to appreciate what we have now." She leaned into his embrace, content in a way she'd never imagined possible. "Then I'm grateful for every step that led us here, even the painful ones." In the corral, Dusty grazed peacefully beside Mary Ellen's mare. The two horses companionable in their shared space, like their owners, they'd learned that some partnerships are worth the risk, worth the wait, worth fighting for. A rider approached from town, not racing with bad news, just ambling with the easy pace of routine business. No longer did approaching horses mean danger. The past had loosened its grip, allowing the future to unfold with promise instead of dread. "Coffee?" Mary Ellen asked, already turning toward the kitchen. "Always," Jack replied, following her inside their home. It was a simple moment, domestic and unremarkable, but for two people who had known isolation and fear, who had faced death and emerged scarred but victorious, it was everything. It was peace. It was belonging. It was love made manifest in the sharing of ordinary days. And in the barn they'd built together from ashes and hope. Swallows were already nesting, preparing for new life in the rafters that had risen from destruction. Nature's promise that endings were just beginnings in disguise, that even the darkest fire could give way to renewal. The wedding ring caught the morning light as Mary Ellen handed Jack his coffee, a circle of gold representing promises kept and a future secured. Outside, the Wyoming plains stretched endless under the vast sky, no longer empty but full of possibility, and in the small ranch house at the edge of Willow Creek, two hearts that had thought themselves beyond saving discovered that love could indeed conquer all, even the ghosts of the past and the judgment of a hard world. The winter that followed their wedding was the harshest in memory. Snow fell in October and didn't stop until March, buried the ranch under white drifts taller than a man. The temperature plunged so low that breath froze in the air and metal burned bare skin. Jack and Mary Ellen faced it together, their partnership tested by nature's fury. Each morning, Jack broke ice on the water troughs while Mary Ellen tended the animals sheltered in the barn. They rationed feed carefully, knowing it had to last until spring. When supplies ran low, they made treacherous trips to town, Dusty and the mare struggling through snow that reached their bellies. "We'll make it," Jack promised during the darkest nights, when the wind howled like a living thing and the house groaned under the weight of snow. "We've survived worse than winter." Mary Ellen would press close to him, drawing warmth and comfort from his presence. "Together," she'd whisper. "We'll make it together." The isolation that might have broken them instead forged them stronger. They talked through the long evenings, sharing stories and dreams. Jack taught Mary Ellen card games learned in a dozen saloons, while she read to him from her small collection of books. They planned improvements for the ranch, sketched expansions that seemed impossible now, but would someday be real. When the storms were worst and travel impossible, neighbors checked on each other. Ben Hutchinson rode over after each blizzard, making sure they had what they needed. The Morrisons sent their eldest boy with preserved goods. Even Mrs. Patterson, the Reverend's wife, knitted them warm scarves and mittens. "Never seen a winter like this," Hutchinson said during one visit, ice crystals in his beard. "But if any couple can weather it, it's you two. You've already been through trial by fire. This is just trial by ice." In February, when the cold was deepest and spring seemed like a fairy tale, Mary Ellen fell ill. It started as a cough, progressed to fever, then to a weakness that confined her to bed. Jack tended her with desperate devotion, riding through a blizzard to fetch Doc Winters from town. Pneumonia, the doctor diagnosed grimly. Keep her warm. Get fluids in her when you can. The rest is up to her strength and the Lord's will. For 2 weeks, Jack barely left her side. He spooned broth between her lips, kept the fire roaring, talked to her constantly even when she was too fevered to respond. The neighbors rallied again. Sarah Morrison and Martha Hutchinson took turns helping with the nursing, bringing food so Jack could focus on Mary Ellen. The night her fever broke, Jack wept with relief. Mary Ellen opened clear eyes for the first time in days, whispering his name. "I'm here," he assured her, gripping her hand. "I'm right here." "I dreamed," she said weakly. "Dreamed I was lost in the snow. Couldn't find my way home. But then I heard your voice, calling me back." "Always," Jack promised. "I'll always call you back." Recovery was slow but steady. By the time the first Chinook winds brought hints of spring, Mary Ellen was back on her feet, thinner but with a new appreciation for life's fragility and preciousness. The snow began its reluctant retreat in late March, revealing a landscape transformed. The creek ran high with meltwater, turning their calm stream into a rushing torrent. But the grass beneath the snow was green and ready, and the animals had survived the winter's test. As they stood together watching the sun set over mountains, still capped with white, Mary Ellen said, "I have something to tell you." Jack turned to her, noting the mix of joy and uncertainty in her expression. "What is it?" She took his hand, placed it on her still flat stomach. "By autumn, we won't be alone anymore. There'll be 3 of us." Jack stared at her, comprehension dawning slowly. "A baby, we're having a baby." Doc Winters confirmed it when he came to check on my recovery. October. He thinks. Jack pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his joy. "A baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Mary Ellen asked when he set her down. "I know we haven't been married long, and with the ranch still struggling." "Happy," Jack cupped her face in his hands. "Mary Ellen McCade, you've given me everything I never knew I wanted. A home, a purpose, a future. And now a child. I'm not just happy, I'm complete." The news transformed their planning. The ranch improvements took on new urgency. They'd need to expand the house, ensure steady income, build a life suitable for raising a child. Jack threw himself into the work with renewed energy, helped by neighbors who were delighted by the news. "About time we had some young ones running around," Martha Hutchinson declared. "This town's been too quiet for too long." Summer brought its own challenges: drought that threatened the creek, grass fires that required constant vigilance, the eternal struggle against weather and land. But it also brought growth. The garden Mary Ellen planted flourished under her care. The small herd of cattle Jack had purchased grew sleek on good grass, and Mary Ellen herself bloomed with impending motherhood. They chose names during evening walks, debated whether the child would have Jack's dark hair or Mary Ellen's green eyes. They planned and dreamed and built their future one day at a time. In September, a letter arrived that threatened to shatter their peace. It bore the Sinclair seal, and Jack's hands tightened as he recognized it. But the contents surprised them. "Mr. McCade," it read. "I am James Sinclair, eldest son of the late Robert Sinclair. I write to inform you that my family considers all debts settled. My brother Garrett was, as we have learned, not the man we believed him to be. Evidence has come to light of numerous crimes and cruelties. You did what you had to do. Live your life in peace. No Sinclair will trouble you again." Mary Ellen read it twice, then looked at Jack with tears in her eyes. "It's truly over. All of it." "Seems so," Jack agreed, still hardly believing it. "We're free. Mary Ellen. Really and truly free." October arrived with golden aspens and crisp air. Mary Ellen's time came on a clear morning when the mountains stood sharp against the sky. Jack rode hard for Doc Winters while Sarah Morrison stayed with Mary Ellen. The labor was long, but without complications. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, a baby's cry filled the house. Jack, allowed in at last, found Mary Ellen exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. "Your son," she said, offering the baby to Jack. "William Thomas McCade. After your father and mine." Jack took his son with shaking hands, marveling at the perfect fingers, the shock of dark hair, the unfocused eyes that would surely be green like his mother's. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "Welcome to the world." Friends and neighbors visited over the following days, bringing gifts and good wishes. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with life, baby cries, laughter, the constant stream of well-wishers. "Look what love built," Mary Ellen said one evening as they sat with little Will sleeping between them. "From ashes and loneliness and fear, look what we've made." Jack looked around the room, at the furniture they'd chosen together. The curtains Mary Ellen had sewn, the cradle he'd built with his own hands. Through the window, he could see the barn they'd raised from destruction, the corral where Dusty and the mare grazed peacefully, the land they'd tended through seasons of trial. "We've made a life," he agreed, "a good life." As if in response to his words, Will stirred and opened his eyes. Seeming to focus on his parents' faces, Mary Ellen began to sing softly, a lullaby her mother had sung to her, now passed to a new generation. Jack added his voice to hers, rough but true, harmonizing in the way they'd learned to harmonize in everything. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, but inside was warmth and love and the promise of tomorrow. The couple who had found each other in loneliness and danger had built something stronger than either could have managed alone. They'd proved that second chances were possible, that love could bloom in the most unlikely soil, that two broken hearts could heal each other and create something new and whole. As the evening deepened and the snow continued to fall, Jack remembered that first night when he'd whispered, "Ride with me tonight," to a woman trapped by grief and convention. She had ridden with him through danger and doubt, through fire and ice, and now they rode together into a future bright with possibility. "No regrets?" he asked, as had become their tradition. "None," Mary Ellen replied, reaching across their sleeping son to take Jack's hand. "Only gratitude. For you. For Will. For this life we've built from nothing but stubbornness and love." Jack brought her hand to his lips, sealing the moment with a kiss. Outside, the Wyoming wind sang its ancient song, but inside the little house at the edge of Willow Creek, a family was complete. A love story had found its happy ending, and the wild heart of the West beat on, steady and sure as the promises they'd made and kept. In that moment, with snow falling and their child sleeping peacefully between them, Jack McCade and Mary Ellen knew they had found what so many sought in the harsh beauty of the frontier, not just land to claim or gold to mine, but a place to belong, a person to love, and a future worth every trial they'd endured to reach it. The lamp burned low as they sat in companionable silence. Two souls who had been lost now found. Two hearts who had been broken now whole. Proof that even in the wildest places, love could take root and flourish, strong enough to weather any storm. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Are you by a cozy fireplace, on your daily commute, or perhaps dreaming of frontier adventures? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's connect over our shared love of these timeless stories of courage, romance, and the enduring human spirit.